From Braddon, why doesn't the right stand for imprisoning those who have abortions? An argument that the women have been indoctrinated to believe it's not murder doesn't make it so. The brainwashed Manson family were put behind bars. Why shouldn't the individuals who elect and go through with having their children slaughtered in the womb be charged for murder as well? I'll tell you why I think so, and I do think it's important. It's a good question. I talk a lot about George Washington as a hero of liberty, and he was. There's not a person, man or woman, walking the earth today who does not owe George Washington a debt for the liberty he created in this country when he could have been king, when he set aside a kingdom, an entire continent he could have ruled over. I can't think of anybody else. They compare him to Cincinnatus, who fought the battle and went home, but I don't know if Cincinnatus was in the position that Washington was in to just take over an entire new country and become its king. He was so dedicated to liberty that he gave that up. And yet, George Washington could not understand why his slaves wouldn't work hard. I've talked about this a lot. I know I've used this example before, but it's important. He couldn't understand it. He couldn't understand why a slave he had treated well would escape. Couldn't get it. It took him his whole life. He finally figured it out. It finally got to him. That's how powerful the narrative is. If you wonder why I'm always picking on the press, why I'm always picking on Hollywood, it's because they help create the narrative. And when you are in that narrative, it sweeps you away. You don't even know you're in it. George Washington, hero of liberty, could not understand why a slave would want his liberty. That's how powerful the narrative is. That is the state we are in with abortion. Good people are having abortions, and good people are feeling that this is okay because they are so swept up in that narrative, as Washington was swept up in the narrative that somehow it was okay to hold a brother individual as a slave. Okay? They're swept up in that narrative. That's how blind they are. You cannot imprison people for that because it is essentially misunderstanding your time. And the same reason I don't hate George Washington, the same reason I don't take away his heroism or take away his greatness and say, well, you say he was great, but he held slaves, because I understand the power of narrative. That is the power. If good people are doing things, and lots of good people are doing things and having these abortions, you have to convince them. You have to change the narrative. You have to bring them back to their senses. We saw yesterday with that woman, Michelle Wolf, is that her last name, celebrating abortion, what a false narrative does to people. It allows them to hold slaves and feel that they're good people. It allows them to have abortions and feels it's all right. It allows a comedian to go out and celebrate abortion. If Michelle Wolf, with that level of insight, had lived back in slavery days, she'd have been doing that dance for slavery. Hooray for America, hooray for slavery. She'd been doing the same thing because that's how deeply immersed in that narrative she is. And that is why we do not believe that the good people who are having abortions because they are blinded by the narrative should be punished like criminals. That's why.